At my son's funeral, his widow held my hand. A month later, she moved her lover into the house Daniel built for me. She told me, either get used to it or pack your bags. She laughed while dragging away his favorite chair. I stayed quiet, playing the grieving mother. But the next night at dinner, I made her beg to leave. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The house was too quiet, a silence that pressed against the walls as if it wanted to suffocate me. Just 1 month had passed since Daniel's funeral, and every corner of this place still carried his presence. His favorite coffee mug remained by the sink, untouched. The flannel shirt he wore on cool evenings still hung in my closet. I clung to those pieces of him because I could not let go. But grief had no respect for my mourning. It was about to be invaded. When the front door opened that afternoon, laughter echoed down the hallway. Not Daniel's voice, not the warm timbre that had once filled his home, but a man's voice, unfamiliar and out of place. Then came Vanessa's laugh, high, sharp, careless, as if she had forgotten the dirt on Daniel's grave was still fresh. I froze in the kitchen, my hands trembling around Daniel's mug. They appeared together, Vanessa glowing with an unsettling pride, and the man she introduced as Derek standing too close, his arm around her waist. Derek was younger, with a smile that stopped at the lips and never reached his eyes. "Evelyn," Vanessa said casually, as though nothing about this moment was obscene. "This is Derek. He'll be staying with us for a while." The diamond ring Daniel had worked 3 long years to afford glittered on her finger as she rested her hand against Derek's chest. The sight tore something open inside me. 32 days. That was all the time it had taken for her to replace him. My throat closed around the words I could not speak. I whispered instead, "I think I'll head upstairs," and slipped past them before my face betrayed the storm rising in me. That night, I buried my tears in Daniel's old flannel shirt, holding the faded fabric as though it could anchor me to him. The next morning, Vanessa cornered me in the hallway, her voice clipped and unyielding. "Derek isn't just visiting, Evelyn. He's moving in permanently." She said it as though it were an announcement about paint colors or new curtains. My silence must have offended her because she sighed as if I were being difficult. "Daniel's gone. I'm still young and I have a life to live." "This was Daniel's house," I whispered. "It's mine now," she snapped, eyes narrowing with cold determination. "I'm giving you options. Either get used to Derek being here or pack your things and leave. Honestly, it might be better for everyone if you did move out. You're a constant reminder of—" She waved her hand vaguely, as though my existence were a stain on her new life. Her words struck me like a blow. Daniel had drawn these plans by hand when he was just 16, sketching dreams across scrap paper while I cooked dinner. He had saved for years, working job after job, determined to buy this land and raise a house with enough space for everyone he loved. I remembered the day he unveiled the finished home to me, his arm draped proudly across my shoulders. "There's an apartment for you, Mom," he said with that grin that could light up the world. "So you'll always have a place here." And now his widow, the woman wearing his ring, was trying to erase me from the very home he built for us both. I retreated to my room, unable to listen to their laughter drifting up from the living room as they moved Daniel's furniture, dragging away pieces of him as if they were clutter. When I heard the scrape of his recliner, the chair he loved after long days on the job, being shoved across the hardwood floor, something inside me cracked. That night, I pulled out the family photo albums. Page after page told Daniel's story. At 8 years old, hammering nails beside his father. At 16, bent over his sketches. At 30, beaming in front of this very house, tool belt around his waist, pride glowing in his eyes. He had wrapped his arm around me that day, dust still on his clothes, and told me, "You'll never be without a home, Mom." How dare she? How dare Vanessa try to cast me out? The following morning, I found them in the kitchen, drinking coffee from Daniel's mugs as if they had the right. Derek leaned back with his feet on the antique stool Daniel had refinished for me years ago. Vanessa looked up, unbothered, and asked, "Have you thought about what I said?" "I need some time," I replied, clutching my robe tight around me. "Don't take too long," she answered flatly. "We're thinking of remodeling, and it would be easier without you here." Remodeling, erasing even more of Daniel, one wall, one photograph, one memory at a time. I went back upstairs, my grief hardening into something stronger, something that felt like resolve. I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the corner of the room where Daniel had once placed a small filing cabinet after I complained about misplacing important papers. "Keep everything organized, Mom," he had said with a patient smile. I had almost forgotten it was there. With trembling hands, I pulled open the top drawer. Papers rustled against each other, medical records, tax returns, receipts. And then, tucked neatly in a folder labeled simply House, I saw Daniel's handwriting, steady and meticulous. My pulse quickened as I spread the documents across my bed. The first page stopped me cold. The deed to the house, listing two names, Daniel Carter and Evelyn Carter. My name. My name was there. Tears blurred the words, but I could still see the note Daniel had paperclipped to the corner. "Mom, just making sure you're always taken care of. Love, Daniel." I pressed the paper to my chest, my sobs breaking free. Even in death, my son was protecting me. Vanessa thought she could push me out, but she had underestimated Daniel and me. I wiped my face, straightened the papers, and whispered to the empty room, "This changes everything." The papers lay across my bed in a neat, devastating line. The deed was only the beginning. Beneath it, I discovered a letter from Daniel's doctor, dated 2 months before his death. The words blurred as I read, "Second opinion confirms original diagnosis. Recommend discussing end-of-life care and finalizing all personal affairs." My chest tightened. Daniel had known his time was running short, and while I had clung to hope, he had been preparing quietly, deliberately, to shield me. Next to the letter was a receipt from Thomas Blake's law office, dated 3 weeks before Daniel died. My hands shook as I realized he had gone to see a psychiatrist, had rewritten his final wishes while I was too consumed with grief and caretaking to notice. Vanessa had handled everything after the funeral, waving me off whenever I asked about legal matters. "It's all standard," she had said. "The house goes to me, and Daniel's personal items go to you. Nothing to worry about." But there had been plenty to worry about, and she knew it. At the bottom of the folder rested a small, leather-bound journal I had never seen. Daniel's handwriting filled every page. The first entry I read tore me open. "Mom seems to be taking it harder than Vanessa. I worry about what will happen to her when I'm gone. Vanessa's been distant lately, always on her phone, always with excuses to leave the house. I hate to think it, but something doesn't feel right." I turned the pages, my breath catching on the words that followed. Saw a text on Vanessa's phone today from someone named Derek. "Miss you too. Soon we won't have to hide." The pen marks pressed hard into the paper as if Daniel's hand had trembled with anger. My heart ached with fury and sorrow. While my son fought for his life, his wife carried on with another man. And now she had the audacity to parade that same man into his home and tell me to leave. The next entry was written only days before Daniel could no longer get out of bed. "Met with Thomas at the law office today, updated my will, and made sure Mom's name is on everything. Vanessa doesn't know. I hate being suspicious, but I need to protect her. The house is as much hers as anyone's. She helped me design it, picked every fixture, planted every flower in the garden. No matter what happens, she will always have a home here." I closed the journal and pressed it against my chest, sobbing into the leather cover. My son, my thoughtful, perceptive boy, had known. He had seen what I could not, had suspected betrayal, and taken steps to guard me. A sudden memory rose, sharp and painful. Vanessa insisting on handling the paperwork after the funeral, brushing off my questions with that cold efficiency. "It's all been filed, Evelyn. Nothing for you to worry about." Now I understood. She had lied, not just to me, but to Daniel in his final days, and she was trying to erase his last act of love. Driven by equal parts grief and determination, I returned to the filing cabinet. I searched every drawer until, at the very back of the bottom one, I found a business card. Thomas Blake, attorney at law, embossed in deep navy ink. On the back, in Daniel's handwriting, "Call any time, Mom. Thomas will help you if you need it." The clock on my nightstand read just past 2 in the afternoon. Not too late. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number. A receptionist answered, her voice brisk but softening the moment I introduced myself. "Mrs. Carter, of course. Mr. Blake mentioned you might call someday. Let me put you through." There was a short pause, and then a deep, steady voice filled my ear. Mrs. Carter, this is Thomas Blake. I've been waiting for your call. My throat tightened. Mr. Blake, I just found documents about the house. I think my daughter-in-law hasn't been entirely truthful with me. I was afraid of that, he said gravely. Daniel worried about the same thing. Would you be able to come to my office tomorrow morning? There's much we need to discuss. Yes, I answered, my gaze drifting toward the bedroom door where Vanessa and Derek's muffled laughter seeped in from the living room. I'll be there first thing. After hanging up, I carefully returned the documents to the filing cabinet, except for the deed and Daniel's journal. Those I tucked securely into my purse. For the first time since Daniel's death, my grief carried something sharper inside it. Purpose. That evening, I surprised Vanessa and Derek by joining them for dinner. It was the first time since Derek's arrival that I had sat at the table with them. They exchanged wary glances, but said nothing as I quietly took a seat. I've been thinking about what you said, I told Vanessa, keeping my tone level. About me moving out. Her eyes lit up with satisfaction. I think it's for the best, Evelyn. You could find a nice little apartment, start fresh. I'll need some time to get my affairs in order, I replied, careful to mask the steel in my voice. Maybe a few days. Of course, she said quickly, relief plain on her face. Take whatever time you need. We're not monsters. Derek chuckled low and smug, reaching for her hand across the table. She still wore Daniel's wedding ring. Their fingers intertwined made my stomach twist. I appreciate that, I said, forcing a small smile. I think I'll start making some calls tomorrow. As I excused myself from the table, I heard Derek whisper, that was easier than I thought it would be. They had no idea. Tomorrow, everything would change. Tomorrow, they would learn whose house they were really living in. The morning air bit at my skin as I pulled my old sedan out of the driveway, Daniel's folder of documents strapped into the passenger seat like a silent ally. My hands clutched the steering wheel, trembling not from the chill, but from the storm rising in me. For weeks, I had moved through this house like a ghost, powerless and small. Today, I carried proof that Daniel had never abandoned me, that his love had built walls no one could tear down. Today, I would find out the truth. Thomas Blake's office was in a modest brick building downtown, unassuming from the outside but lined inside with rows of books that smelled of old paper and history. He was waiting when I arrived, already standing in the doorway of his office, his hand extended. His grip was firm, steady, grounding me in a way I hadn't felt since Daniel died. Mrs. Carter, he said warmly, thank you for coming. Please call me Evelyn, I answered, my voice steadier than I expected. He nodded, gesturing for me to sit across from his desk. The room was lined with photographs, certificates, the weight of years of service. On his bookshelf, I noticed a framed picture of him and Daniel from their college days, both young and smiling, their arms slung across each other's shoulders. My heart lurched. You knew my son well, I murmured. Thomas's eyes softened. He was like a brother to me. When he got his diagnosis, I was one of the first people he called. He was worried about you, Evelyn. Worried about what would happen after he was gone. I slid the folder across his desk. I found these yesterday. My name is on the deed. Vanessa never mentioned it. Thomas opened the papers, his expression calm but grim. That's because Daniel asked me to keep it quiet. He feared what Vanessa might do if she knew. She moved Derek into our house a month after Daniel's funeral, I said bitterly. She told me I had to get used to it or leave. His jaw tightened. She has no legal right to push you out. In fact, it's the other way around. You have the stronger claim. My breath caught. You mean I could ask her to leave? Yes, Thomas said firmly. Daniel not only placed you on the deed, he updated his will. Vanessa never filed the new document, likely because it stripped her of total control. Under this will, you're guaranteed lifetime residency rights. He also created a trust to cover property taxes and upkeep, money she can't touch. Tears pricked at my eyes. My son thought of everything. Thomas leaned forward, his voice steady. Vanessa has been operating under the assumption that she inherited it all, but she's lying. And if she forged or withheld documents, she's in dangerous legal territory. You have options, Evelyn. We can confront her directly with evidence, or we can take this to court. I thought of Vanessa's cold smile, Derek's smug laughter, their plans to remodel Daniel's home. My grief hardened into resolve. I want to confront her, here, in this house. She needs to see that Daniel protected me, even from her. Thomas studied me for a long moment, then nodded. All right, but it will go smoother if we have a witness, someone who can corroborate Daniel's state of mind when he signed these papers. A memory surfaced. Michael Harris, Daniel's closest friend from the construction company. He had been kind at the funeral, hovering nearby as though afraid to leave me alone. Thomas seemed to read my thoughts. Michael was there when Daniel signed the will. He also has evidence of Vanessa's affair, photographs, financial statements. Daniel asked him to hold on to them. My breath stilled. He knew? Yes, Thomas said softly. Daniel wanted to confront her, but his health declined too quickly. Instead, he left a trail to protect you. Michael's been waiting for the right time to hand everything over. I closed my eyes, the weight of my son's foresight pressing against me. Even as death closed in, he had been fighting for me. Thomas's voice broke through my thoughts. We can arrange a meeting tomorrow evening at your house, 6 o'clock. I'll bring the will and documents. Michael will bring his evidence. Together, we'll confront Vanessa. She won't be able to deny what she's done. I nodded slowly, my pulse racing with fear and anticipation. Tomorrow, then. As I left his office, I felt something shift inside me. For weeks, I had been drowning in sorrow, powerless in the face of Vanessa's cruelty. Now, armed with Daniel's love and the truth, I felt something I hadn't in months: strength. That evening, I joined Vanessa and Derek in the living room. They were sprawled across Daniel's furniture, a glossy magazine of interior designs open between them. I've been thinking, I said softly, letting my voice waver just enough. Maybe we should have one last dinner together before I go. A farewell of sorts. I could cook Daniel's favorite meal. Vanessa's eyes lit with triumph. That's not necessary. Please, I interrupted gently, lowering my gaze. It would mean so much to me. Just one last family meal. She hesitated, exchanged a glance with Derek, then shrugged. Fine, what time? 6 o'clock, I answered. The moment she agreed, I turned away, hiding the spark of resolve that burned in my chest. She thought it would be a farewell dinner. She had no idea it would be the night her lies unraveled. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I whispered into the quiet, "Tomorrow, Daniel, we'll show her whose house this truly is." This story is far from over. What comes next will shake every lie Vanessa built and expose the betrayal she thought she buried. If you've been walking beside me through this journey, don't stop now. Like, share, and subscribe, because the storm about to break will leave you breathless. The night before the dinner, I barely slept. I paced the narrow length of my bedroom, rehearsing my words, imagining Vanessa's expression when the truth landed in front of her like a thunderclap. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw Daniel's handwriting, the note clipped to the deed, just making sure you're always taken care of. His faith gave me courage, even as fear gnawed at the edges of my resolve. At dawn, I dressed and drove to the grocery store. The aisles smelled of fresh bread and sharp coffee, and every item I placed in the cart carried a weight heavier than its price tag. Pot roast, carrots, potatoes, rolls, apples for pie, all of Daniel's favorites. This meal would not be just food. It would be a battleground, a memorial, a reckoning. Back at the house, I moved quietly through the kitchen, peeling potatoes, trimming carrots, searing the meat with steady hands. When Vanessa wandered in, shopping bags slung over her arm, she paused at the counter. "Need help?" she asked with a casual sweetness that barely concealed her impatience. "This is something I need to do myself," I answered with a sad smile, letting my voice tremble just enough. She seemed satisfied, her eyes glittering with that strange, triumphant light, and left me alone. By late afternoon, the house smelled of simmering pot roast and buttered rolls. The apple pie cooled on the counter, its golden crust filling the air with cinnamon and memory. I set the dining table with Daniel's favorite china, the delicate porcelain plates passed down from his grandmother, polished until they shone. At the center, I placed a vase of fresh daffodils, his favorite flower, bright and unyielding. At 5:30, I retreated upstairs. I slipped into a simple blue dress, the color Daniel had always said made my eyes look like summer skies. From a velvet box, I lifted the pearl earrings he had given me for my 60th birthday. Fastening them, I stared at my reflection. The woman who looked back at me was not the broken widow Vanessa believed she could control. This was a mother carrying her son's legacy, a woman with fire still in her heart. At 5:45, a car pulled into the driveway, its tires crunching over gravel. Then another. I moved to the window and saw Thomas Blake step out, briefcase in hand, his suit crisp in the fading light. Beside him walked Michael Harris, carrying a thick manila envelope. My pulse quickened. Reinforcements had arrived. Downstairs, I heard Vanessa in the kitchen, humming as if the evening were hers to command. She wiped her hands on a towel and frowned when the doorbell rang. "Are you expecting someone?" she asked. "Just a few guests for dinner," I replied, steady and calm. Before she could question me further, I opened the door. Thomas stood tall, his voice deliberate as he greeted me, loud enough for Vanessa to hear. "Mrs. Carter, thank you for inviting us." Michael gave a polite nod, though his eyes flicked past me, already locking on Vanessa with quiet disapproval. Vanessa's posture stiffened. "What is this?" "Dinner," I said simply, holding the door wider, "and a long overdue conversation." From upstairs, Derek descended, his footsteps heavy on the staircase. His brow furrowed when he spotted Thomas and Michael. "What's going on?" "Apparently we're having company," Vanessa muttered, her tone tight. Thomas extended his hand toward Derek. "Thomas Blake, attorney at law, and you must be Derek Malone." The color drained from Vanessa's face at the formal introduction. Derek's handshake faltered, his smile brittle. "Why don't we all sit down?" I suggested, gesturing toward the dining room. "The food will get cold." The table gleamed beneath the overhead light. Steam rose from the pot roast, framed by mashed potatoes, roasted carrots, and golden rolls. Every detail was deliberate, every piece of china a reminder of Daniel's presence. At the head of the table, his chair remained conspicuously empty, a silent witness to what was about to unfold. I took my place at one end. Thomas settled to my right, Michael to my left. Vanessa and Derek slid reluctantly into the seats across from us, their discomfort sharp enough to taste in the air. Vanessa tried to mask her tension with brittle sarcasm. "What kind of conversation requires a lawyer, Evelyn?" I set a slice of roast on her plate, meeting her eyes. "The kind that involves my son's final wishes." Thomas opened his briefcase with a quiet click and pulled out a folder, laying it on the table with care. "Mrs. Ellis," he addressed Vanessa formally, "I'm here as the executor of Daniel Carter's estate. There are matters that require your immediate attention." Vanessa stiffened. "Daniel's will was settled weeks ago. Everything went to me as his wife." "That's not entirely accurate," Thomas replied, sliding the document toward her. "This is Daniel's final will, executed 3 weeks before his death. It supersedes the one you filed, and which, I should note, was never properly entered into probate." Her face paled as her eyes darted over the paper. Derek leaned closer, his jaw tightening as he read. "This can't be legal," she snapped. "Daniel was sick, confused, on heavy medication." Michael leaned forward, his voice steady. "I was there when he signed it, along with Dr. Matthews, who certified his competence. Daniel knew exactly what he was doing." I picked up my fork, forcing myself to take a small bite of food while watching Vanessa's composure fray. "As you can see," Thomas continued, "the will specifies that while you retain partial ownership of the house, Evelyn Carter is named as co-owner with explicit lifetime residency rights. Furthermore, a trust has been established to cover her expenses." Vanessa's eyes flew to mine, burning with accusation. "You knew about this?" "I only discovered it yesterday," I said truthfully. Derek muttered under his breath, his hand gripping Vanessa's arm. "We can contest this, claim undue influence." "I wouldn't advise that," Michael said, opening his envelope. He spread photographs across the table. Vanessa and Derek together at restaurants, in hotel lobbies, shopping, months before Daniel's diagnosis. Then came bank statements, transfers highlighted in neon yellow. "Elevate Designs," Michael explained coldly. "Derek's startup. Nearly $50,000 taken from Daniel and Vanessa's joint account while Daniel was dying." Silence fell over the table, thick and suffocating. I looked at Vanessa, my voice quiet but resolute. "My son knew, Vanessa. He may not have lived to confront you, but tonight, you will face the truth." The air around the table crackled like a storm about to break. Vanessa's fingers twitched as she shoved the photographs away, her nails scraping across porcelain. Derek shifted in his chair, his bravado cracking under the weight of the evidence spread before him. Across from them, Thomas's calm presence was unyielding, a steady wall against their panic. "This is harassment," Derek snapped, his voice rising. "You have no right to dig into our private lives." Thomas leaned back in his chair, folding his hands. "When those private lives involve siphoning money from a dying man, it ceases to be private. What you see here is proof of fraud and betrayal, and it will hold up in court." Vanessa's chest rose and fell in sharp bursts, her eyes darting from the papers to me, to Michael, to the empty head of the table where Daniel should have been. "You planned this," she hissed. "You set me up with this ambush dinner." I met her glare without flinching. "You set this in motion the moment you brought your lover into my son's home and told me to leave. I'm simply finishing what Daniel began." Michael slid another set of documents toward Thomas, who produced them with deliberate care. "There's also the matter of the life insurance policy," he said evenly. "Daniel took out a separate policy naming Evelyn as the sole beneficiary. That policy appears to have been cashed by someone else." The words fell like a hammer. Vanessa's face contorted, her voice shrill. "That's a lie. Daniel would never cut me out like that." "He didn't want to," I said softly, my voice trembling with both sorrow and strength. "Even after he knew about you and Derek, he still loved you. But he loved me too. He wanted to make sure I was safe. That was his final wish." Derek pushed back from the table, the chair legs screeching across the hardwood floor. "We don't have to listen to this circus. Vanessa, let's go." "No," Thomas said firmly. "You're going to sit down and hear this. Because what we're offering you tonight is mercy compared to what will come if we take this to court. Fraudulent insurance claims, misappropriated funds, adultery, all of it will come to light." The silence that followed was suffocating. The only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Vanessa's hand clenched into a fist against the tablecloth, her knuckles bone white. "What do you want?" she spat. Thomas placed one final document before her. "This is an offer to buy out your portion of the house at fair market value, $215,000. You and Derek take the money and leave. Quietly, cleanly, no lawsuits, no criminal charges. You can start fresh somewhere else." Vanessa stared at the figure as though the numbers themselves burned her eyes. Derek leaned over her shoulder, his expression shifting from outrage to calculation. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind. How much that money could prop up his failing business. How far it might carry them if they ran. "And if we refuse?" Vanessa asked, her voice sharp as glass. "Then we proceed with legal action," Thomas replied, his tone cold and precise. "The insurance fraud alone could result in criminal charges, not just civil penalties. You could lose far more than this house." The clock ticked louder, each second stretching into eternity. Vanessa looked at me, her eyes blazing with hatred. But beneath it was something new. Fear. "You think you've won," she said, her lip curling. "There are no winners here," I answered quietly. "Only truth. Daniel didn't want it to come to this, but he loved me enough to make sure I could never be erased." Michael's voice broke the silence, low and steady. "Daniel still cared about you, Vanessa, even when he knew. But he cared about his mother more." For a moment, I thought Vanessa might hurl the plate in front of her against the wall. Instead, she pushed it away untouched, her appetite drowned in bitterness. "We'll need time to think," she said coldly. "You have until noon tomorrow," Thomas replied. "After that, we proceed with the fraud investigation." Derek muttered under his breath, "Blackmail." "Justice," I corrected, rising to clear the table. The food sat untouched, steam fading into the heavy air. "You're welcome to stay for dessert. I made Daniel's favorite apple pie." Vanessa shoved her chair back, the legs scraping harshly. "This isn't over." "Yes, it is," I said, meeting her gaze with calm finality. She stormed upstairs, Derek trailing behind her. Their footsteps pounded against the hardwood, then faded. The house exhaled into silence. I stood there in the dining room, my hands resting on the edge of the table. I had expected triumph, maybe even vindication. Instead, what filled me was something quieter, steadier. Peace. For the first time since Daniel's death, I felt the walls of this house belonged to me again. Thomas rose and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You did well tonight, Evelyn. Daniel would be proud." Michael nodded, his voice soft. "He's still here, in this house, in everything he left behind. Their words wrapped around me like a blanket as they left, their footsteps steady down the porch steps. When the door closed behind them, I was alone in the house Daniel had built. Alone, but no longer powerless. Upstairs, Vanessa and Derek's muffled argument rose, sharp and urgent. They would take the money. They had no other choice. Tomorrow they would be gone, and I would begin the slow, tender work of reclaiming my son's legacy. The storm had broken, and though the wreckage still littered the ground, the air smelled of something new. Possibility. And if you followed me this far, don't look away now. What happens next will prove that truth can't just shatter lies, it can rebuild lives. Like, share, and subscribe because the story of this house is far from finished. The night after the dinner, the house felt like a battlefield that had gone silent, the echoes of conflict still vibrating in the walls. I lay in bed listening to the muffled voices upstairs. Vanessa and Derek argued in hushed but frantic tones, their anger rising and falling like waves against the shore. I could not make out every word, but the rhythm of desperation was unmistakable. At dawn, I rose and moved through the house with deliberate calm. The dining room still bore the scars of last night, the untouched plates, the faint scent of roast and pie now faded into the air. I gathered the dishes, washed them carefully, and polished Daniel's china until it gleamed again. Each stroke of the cloth steadied me. This house had survived the storm. Now it was time to restore its order. Upstairs, I heard the scrape of suitcases being dragged across hardwood. Vanessa's sharp voice snapped at Derek, followed by the heavy thud of drawers closing. My heart pounded, but I kept my pace slow, unhurried. Whatever decision they made, I would not let them see fear in me again. By mid-morning, Vanessa appeared in the hallway, her face pale but her chin raised. Derek loomed behind her, his expression tense, his jaw clenched. She stopped at the base of the stairs, staring at me with a mixture of defiance and defeat. "We'll take the offer," she said finally, her voice clipped. A relief spread through me like sunlight breaking through clouds, but I did not let it show. "Very well," I answered evenly. "Thomas will finalize the paperwork." Vanessa's eyes narrowed, her bitterness palpable. She thrust an envelope into my hand. "The signed agreement. The keys are on the hook by the door. We've taken only what's ours." Derek shifted uncomfortably beside her, his shoulders tight with resentment. They moved toward the door without another word. The sound of their luggage bumping against the steps followed them outside, then the slam of car doors. Moments later, the engine of Vanessa's sleek silver sedan roared to life. I stood at the window and watched as they drove away, their tail lights vanishing down the road. The silence that followed was profound. For the first time since Daniel's funeral, the house was mine again. Not to share, not to defend, but to inhabit fully. My hands shook as I pressed the envelope against my chest. Daniel's foresight had preserved this sanctuary for me, and now Vanessa's presence was only a shadow in memory. I walked through the house slowly, room by room, taking stock of what remained. Much of the newer furniture was gone, stripped away in their hasty departure. The television was missing, along with the microwave, the blender, and other appliances Vanessa had insisted were essentials. Yet the rooms felt lighter without them, less cluttered by her taste and her disregard. When I stepped into what had once been Daniel's office, now left bare, I paused. The exercise equipment Vanessa had crammed into the space was gone, leaving the outlines of nail holes and faint discoloration on the walls where Daniel's drawings had once hung. I stood in the empty center of the room and closed my eyes, remembering the quiet hours he had spent here. Drafting plans, sketching houses, sipping coffee is silence. The space still breathed with his essence, waiting to be reclaimed. "I'll bring it back," I whispered into the emptiness. "Every piece of you, Daniel. I promise." Over the next days, I began the work of restoration. I retrieved boxes from storage, the ones Vanessa had shoved away after the funeral. Daniel's books returned to the shelves, his favorite recliner to the corner of the living room, his collection of wooden bowls to the mantel. Each item I placed brought a measure of peace, as though I were stitching Daniel's presence back into the fabric of the house. Michael became a steady presence during those weeks, helping me lift furniture, repair broken fixtures, and carry in pieces from Daniel's workshop. One afternoon, he arrived with something wrapped in a soft cloth. When he unwrapped it, my breath caught. He was making this for you, Michael said gently, setting the unfinished jewelry box on the kitchen table. For your birthday. He worked on it whenever he had the strength, right up until the end. I ran my fingers across the smooth cherry wood, tracing the dovetail joints, the lid still waiting for its final sanding. Tears stung my eyes. Could you help me finish it? Michael's voice thickened. I'd be honored. Together we worked side by side in Daniel's old office, turning it into a workshop again. Michael taught me how to sand, how to stain, how to polish. My hands, clumsy at first, began to grow steadier, and with each project I felt a quiet healing take root inside me. The act of shaping wood, of creating something tangible from raw material, mirrored the way I was reshaping my grief into strength. Thomas continued to guide me through the legal steps, transferring the property fully into my name and securing the trust Daniel had established. His steady reassurance anchored me through the paperwork and decisions. Meanwhile, the investigation confirmed that Vanessa had attempted to cash Daniel's insurance policy meant for me. Rather than drag her into court, I chose restitution, monthly repayments with interest. It was what Daniel would have wanted, not more conflict, but resolution. As summer deepened, I planted a garden in the backyard. Daffodils, tulips, and roses bloomed in soft colors around Daniel's birthday, a living memorial to his life. Neighbors began to stop by, offering kind words, sharing stories about Daniel, laughing softly over memories. The house filled with voices again, not sharp with tension, but warm with remembrance. Each morning I sat in the sunroom Daniel had built for me, coffee in hand, watching the lights spill across the wooden floor he had laid himself. The grief was still there, a quiet ache that would never leave, but it no longer consumed me. The house was no longer a battlefield. It was home. The morning they left, the house breathed differently. For weeks it had felt suffocated by tension, the walls pressed in by Vanessa's contempt and Derek's arrogance. But now silence stretched wide and clean, like air after a violent storm. I stood in the sunroom, the first rays of daylight spilling across the floor Daniel had laid with his own hands, and I felt the shift deep inside me. My son's house was mine again. I spent that day moving slowly from room to room, as though introducing myself to the house anew. I touched the banister Daniel had sanded smooth, the kitchen cabinets he had measured and hung, the window frames he had painted. Every board and beam whispered his name. For the first time since his death, I could breathe without fear of someone tearing him away from me piece by piece. That night, I opened the envelope Michael had left on the counter. Inside was the completed jewelry box we had been working on together. The cherry wood gleamed with polish, the lid smooth as glass. When I lifted it, the hinges opened without a sound, revealing a velvet lining Michael had added. Tears filled my eyes. It was as though Daniel's unfinished gift had finally reached me, his hands guiding mine through Michael's. I traced the edges of this with trembling fingers and whispered, "Thank you, my boy." But Daniel's presence did not end there. Michael returned days later with something larger, heavier, a carefully wrapped bundle carried with reverence. Together we unwrapped it in the sunroom. "It's a bench," he explained softly. "Daniel designed it last year. He didn't get to build it, but the guys at the shop and I finished it for you." The oak curved gracefully, every joint fitted with care, a subtle inlay of darker wood edging the backrest. When we placed it beneath the wide windows, it looked as though it had always belonged there. I sat on it slowly, my palms smoothing the polished surface. "He knew," I murmured, my voice breaking. "He knew this would be my place." Michael nodded, his voice thick. "He talked about how you'd sit here every morning watching the birds. He wanted you to have this." The tears I had fought for so long spilled freely. But this time they were not only grief, they were gratitude, love, the ache of a bond that even death had not severed. In the weeks that followed, the house began to transform. I retrieved Daniel's sketches from storage and hung them back on the walls. Blueprints of homes he'd dreamed of building, drawings of furniture he had planned but never completed. I turned his old office into a workshop of my own, learning from Michael how to carve in sand, how to let the wood reveal its story. My hands grew calloused, but in every creation I felt closer to Daniel, as if I were carrying on his unfinished work. Neighbors who had once kept their distance during Vanessa's reign began stopping by again. They admired the garden I had planted, sharing cuttings and seeds, filling the yard with bursts of color. Old friends of Daniel's came for coffee, sitting at the table to share stories of his humor, his generosity, his dreams. The house filled with laughter again, not the hollow kind that Vanessa and Derek had wielded like a weapon, but the real kind, warm and healing. One evening, Michael brought me a proposal. He unfolded blueprints across the table, Daniel's handwriting scrawled in the margins. He left so many designs unfinished, Michael said. The guys and I thought, what if we built them, sold them, donated a portion to cancer research in his name? That way his work lives on. I stared at the plans, my heart aching with pride. You'd do that? Michael's voice cracked. He wasn't just our boss. He was our friend. This way, he'll never be forgotten. That night, long after Michael had gone, I sat on the oak bench in the sunroom. Moonlight poured across the floor, silvering the wood. My hands rested in my lap, still bearing the faint scent of sawdust. For the first time in months, peace settled over me. Not the fragile kind that shatters at the first sign of pain, but a peace built from purpose. Daniel's death had torn me apart, but his foresight and love had sewn me back together in ways I had not expected. The grief was still there, a shadow I would always carry, but alongside it now grew something new. Strength, connection, even moments of joy. This house, once threatened by betrayal, now stood as a monument to Daniel's life. Every corner hummed with his memory, not as a ghost, but as a legacy. And yet, the story wasn't finished. Because what Michael and his crew were about to create in Daniel's name would move beyond these walls, reaching farther than either of us could imagine. If you've been with me until now, don't turn away. What comes next will show how one man's love can echo far beyond his years, how a legacy can outlive betrayal and transform grief into something enduring. Like, share, and subscribe. Because Daniel's story is only beginning. Autumn settled over the house with a quiet grace. Leaves turned to fire outside the windows, drifting down to blanket the yard Daniel had once tended with such care. The garden I had planted in the spring blossomed into its second life, the flowers now faint but still clinging stubbornly to color, as though refusing to surrender to the cold. Each morning I sat on the oak bench in the sunroom, coffee warming my hands, the scent of wood and earth filling the air. And each morning I felt Daniel near me, not as a shadow of grief, but as a presence woven into the rhythm of my days. The projects Michael and his crew began took root quickly. They retrieved Daniel's unfinished sketches, spread them across the work tables at the shop, and brought them to life. Tables, chairs, cabinets, even small houses. His designs emerged from paper into solid wood and stone. When I visited, the sound of saws and hammers filled the air, the shop alive with purpose. The men spoke of Daniel with reverence, remembering his steady hand, his patience, his laughter. One Saturday, Michael arrived at the house with a finished piece. Together, we carried it into the dining room, a handcrafted sideboard, the wood polished to a deep sheen, the corners fitted with Daniel's trademark dovetail joints. I ran my hands across its surface, marveling at the way it looked both new and familiar. Daniel drew this years ago, Michael said softly. We followed his plans exactly. It's like he's still guiding us. I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. Each new piece was more than furniture. It was a message from Daniel, a continuation of his voice. The community responded in ways none of us expected. Word spread quickly about the Carter Legacy Project. People came from neighboring towns to purchase the pieces, not just for their beauty, but for the story behind them. Michael and the crew set aside a portion of every sale for cancer research, honoring Daniel's memory with every dollar raised. Donations poured in. Articles appeared in local papers. Soon Daniel's name was spoken not just with grief, but with admiration, a legacy expanding far beyond these walls. I found myself drawn into the work more than I anticipated. My hands, once clumsy with tools, grew more confident. I learned to sand with patience, to plane wood until it sang under my touch. Michael showed me how to fit joints together, how to read Daniel's sketches and bring them to life. In those hours, bent over the workbench, I felt closer to my son, than I ever had since his passing. At night, after the shop grew quiet, I returned to the house and carried on with my own projects. I refinished Daniel's old desk, restored the wooden frames of the photographs Vanessa had packed away, and hung them again in the hallway. His smile, captured across decades, looked down at me as I passed, filling the house with warmth. Friends began to visit more often. Some came to help, others to share meals and memories. They spoke of Daniel's generosity, the way he would drop everything to help repair a neighbor's roof or fix a broken fence. They told stories of his stubborn humor, his refusal to give up on a project until it was perfect. Each story was a thread, weaving Daniel back into the fabric of the community. One crisp evening, Michael brought over something extraordinary. Together with Daniel's crew, he had designed a memorial plaque to be placed in the workshop. The bronze plate gleamed in the lamplight, etched with Daniel's name in the words, builder, friend, son. His hands shaped wood, his heart shaped lives. My knees went weak when I read it. Michael steadied me with a hand on my arm. "We wanted you to see it first," he said quietly. Tears blurred my vision. "He would have hated the attention," I whispered. Michael smiled. "Maybe, but he would have loved the reason behind it. Every piece we finish, every dollar we donate, it all carries his spirit forward." In that moment, I realized Daniel's legacy was no longer confined to the walls of this house. It had grown roots in the community, spreading outward like branches reaching for the sky. What Vanessa and Derek had tried to erase was now more alive than ever. Their betrayal had failed. Love had outlasted it. As the months passed, I settled into a rhythm. Mornings in the sunroom, afternoons in the workshop, evenings with friends and neighbors who now filled the house with laughter again. Grief still lingered, but it no longer drowned me. Instead, it walked beside me, softened by purpose. The night before the memorial plaque was to be unveiled at the shop, I sat alone in the sunroom. The moon poured silver light across the bench Daniel had designed, the garden beyond quiet beneath the autumn sky. I opened his journal, not at the painful entries near the end, but at the beginning, where hope had filled his words. "Started the foundation today. Mom came by to see the progress. She's more excited than I am, if that's possible. I'm building this house for the future, with room for everyone I love." I closed the journal, pressing it to my chest. His dream had been interrupted, but it had not died. Through me, through Michael, through every hand that touched his work, it lived on. And so did I. The morning of the unveiling, the air felt charged with anticipation. I woke before dawn, as had become my habit, and carried my coffee into the sunroom. The oak bench sat bathed in pale light, its polished wood gleaming like a promise. Outside, the garden lay still, the last of autumn's roses nodding gently in the breeze. Two cardinals fluttered to the feeder, their crimson feathers catching the rising sun. Daniel's favorite birds. I smiled through the ache in my chest. It was as if he had sent them to remind me that I wasn't alone. Later that day, Michael drove me to the workshop. The building buzzed with life, neighbors, friends, and colleagues gathering to honor the man who had shaped so much with his hands and heart. The scent of fresh-cut wood filled the air, mingling with the low hum of conversation. At the center of the shop, draped in a cloth, stood the memorial plaque. My knees trembled as I approached, Michael steadying me with his arm. When the cloth was pulled away, the bronze gleamed in the afternoon sun. Builder, friend, son. His hands shaped wood, his heart shaped lives. A hush fell over the crowd. For a long moment, the only sound was the creak of the workshop settling, the echo of lives Daniel had touched filling the silence. I placed my hand on the plaque, the cool metal anchoring me. "Thank you," I whispered, not to the crowd, but to Daniel, to my boy who had left me far too soon, but who had somehow managed to protect me even after death. The Carter Legacy Project became more than furniture or fundraising. It became a movement. Orders poured in from places I had never heard of, people wanting to carry a piece of Daniel's vision into their homes. Each sale fueled the donations, each creation spreading his name farther. He was no longer just my son. He belonged to the world now, his kindness etched into every piece of wood shaped by his designs. Back at the house, I continued my own quiet work. I restored Daniel's sketches one by one, framing them along the hallway so that his imagination lined the walls. I filled the garden with bulbs that would bloom each spring near his birthday, turning the earth into a living reminder of his life. Every morning I read passages from his journal, not to drown in sorrow, but to let his dreams guide me forward. One evening in late October, 6 months after his death, I sat in the sunroom as twilight wrapped the house. The wooden bench, the jewelry box, the sideboard in the dining room, each was a testament to his enduring presence. Grief lingered, yes, but it no longer consumed me. Instead, it shared space with gratitude, with strength, with the kind of peace Daniel had always wanted for me. I looked around at the house, at the rooms filled again with love instead of bitterness, and I realized that Vanessa and Derek had taken nothing of real value. They had walked away with furniture and money, but they had left behind what mattered most: Daniel's spirit, his love, his legacy. The house he built for me was not just shelter, it was sanctuary. It was proof that even when the world tries to tear you apart, love can anchor you, protect you, and carry you forward. Now, I often ask myself what Daniel would think if he could see all this. The garden blooming, the workshop alive with his designs, the community rallying in his name. And I know in the quiet of my heart that he would smile. He would be proud not just of what we built from his work, but of the strength he left behind in me. And so, in this house Daniel built, I found not just memory but meaning, not just grief but grace, not just an ending but a beginning. The story of my son, his house, and the legacy he left behind is more than mine. It belongs to anyone who has ever fought to protect love from betrayal, to reclaim what was nearly stolen, to rise again after loss. If you've walked this journey with me, I ask you to keep it alive. Share it, speak it, let it travel farther than these walls, farther than this town. Let Daniel's story remind the world that love endures, that truth prevails, and that legacy cannot be erased. Thank you for standing with me until the end. And now I leave you with this: hold tightly to those you love, honor their memory, and never let betrayal silence the truth. Because when all else falls away, love is what remains.